All right. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome again to TDN 3002. Today we've got Giorgia Pisano with us. Georgia's going to be talking about her research in her PhD research.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And Georgia, I might get you to introduce yourself if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you pronounce my name really, really well.
It's because I've been to Prato.
That's it.
Twice.
You guys should go to Prato. Yeah, so my name is Giorgia Pisano, and I'm the program coordinator for industrial design here in Mother. I joined relatively, like early in the year, so yeah, just in February, so I'm relatively new here. And I also teach in the program, so in the Bachelor LID, and yeah, I finished my PhD at the end of last year, so yeah, that's what I'll be talking about today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'll be talking about my PhD, or part of it. This was kind of my working title a few years ago, like I think in 2022. So garbaging, caging, gazodexing. So I love making up words. This was one of those, and then I call this a reflection and a reflective practice of extemporaneous projects and atelier design, and then you'll understand why. I mainly focus on projects, kind of hands-on projects that allowed me to think through some complex problems. So my PhD was on waste. And so I looked at it from very different perspectives. But yeah, as I said, the PhD really started in a very kind of hands-on kind of way. And so I started making materials. So I was in my studio pretty much like 3 or 4 days a week, kind of experimenting with lots of waste that I would find on the street, around the house, in the workshop. So my studio was placed on the second level of a woodworking space, or like metal and woodworking warehouse, and so I would just collect the waste that I would find, and I would make materials. So these specifically is bacterial cellulose. So I grew this material, and so biofabrication is a process of producing complex material structures, so three-dimensional structures and artifacts through the growth of living organisms and cells. And so it could be bacteria, algae, fungi. Like as you can see here, I was trying to kind of test different materials, but also see how they would naturally kind of behave, and I started like following that, so it became kind of a play kind of game. And so yeah, this is corn silk, and I mixed it with gelatin. So and here I was working with like paper, byproducts, also sawdust and wood shavings, and some cornstarch, and so different kind of like bases for the composite materials that I was making. But as I was saying earlier, I started like becoming really interested in the kind of playful aspects of these materials, and because I realized that as a designer I had very little control over what I could do. And so rather than trying to kind of domesticate the kind of making process, I in a sense was just allowing it to show. And so I allowed the materials to curl and twist and stretch and shrink. And again, this is another biomaterial that I created, but I was interested in allowing the material itself, or the materials, to craft ways of enchanting, or allowing me to enchant myself with my practice. And so and also to look at this thing that is garbage, so this putrescible thing that is kind of like degrading and disappearing, or polluting the environment. And so something that is normally something that we are disenchanted with, and kind of give it an opportunity to understand ourselves as designers in relation to waste, and also waste itself. So what it is and why we call waste.
Yeah. Is it also the relationship, you mentioned the relationship you have with your practice?
Mm-hmm.
Is that happening here through the material? Like you're playing with the material?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It did happen because I had to reshape my relationship to practice, because initially was. And so what I ended up with was this kind of Wunderkammer, which is like a cabinet of curiosities, a German word, that is really about collecting things like based on different relationships they might have. And I was really inspired here. I was actually, of course, also doing literature review and reading lots of texts about different interpretations of waste, and I was inspired by this feminist scholar, Marita Buscaglia, who talks about the liminality of junk. Liminality is like that space in between that allows one to rethink relationality in a way that in which situates the object and myself, so the I, in a multiplicity of relations. So those relations can be bodily, perceptual, affective, economic, individual, collective, and so on, with other materialities and people and discourses and events. And so you start understanding the relations of power as well. Which kind of complicated things. And so what I started asking myself was, who am I being transformed into whilst transforming waste? And so the shift was not just in my practice or in the kind of physical features and appearance of the materials, but it was in myself. So something was happening there.
Beautiful.
So this is phase one that kind of ended towards the end of 2019, that I call garbaging. So it was the joyous and very playful and kind of also mindless in a sense, and explorative research through design. So as I set up to kind of discover whether these new materials could have a practical application, and then they became these curiosities that I could use to think through my practice. And so it's a time that I basically was wasting scraps to experiment with processes of encountering the materials and materiality. And so it was the wasting of time for questions to arise.
Beautiful.
So it's a way of allowing for a pose as well.
Provocative. We're not supposed to waste time.
Very catalyst and productive.
Yes.
Kind of. And as you realise, my PhD was all about wasted time, and that word is used in purpose. This project was really about a kind of three-dimensional writing. So it was a very kind of emotional, like kind of a very difficult period from kind of an emotional perspective, to kind of process what was going on. And so rather than trying to explain or express what I was going through words, I decided to just use my craft for this. And so this is a kind of material three-dimensional patterning on wood pieces of thoughts and emotional states. And so I made 8 legs with a few constraints, and so I always finish a leg per week. And that was really a way of holding my thoughts while information.
Beautiful. Can I? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you're going to show how you made them?
There's a few different ones.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say this is kind of perfect, really, because we're talking about how, as designers, you do capture the kind of thoughts informing. I like how you put it. I haven't described it that way, but how you do that through material processes or process that are kind of connected to your language in a way, like the language of making, and how it can be a knowledge-generating activity, particularly like the self-knowledge that can be formed if you're able to really kind of attune maybe to that process. I mean, we're doing it by bringing in processes that the students are engaging with in studio that are in service to a brief of some description, and then starting to kind of extract or kind of read it in different ways by thinking about it through different kind of we've been using the frame metaphor framing in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think what it's really getting towards is more like what you're showing here, and that this documentation process isn't just a kind of pretty dull, really, reporting of what you did. It's how you turn that into its own process in a way that is an exploratory kind of document that kind of shows process through process.
Yeah, but I guess, this is the interesting part, because this can be seen as a form of kind of using your favorite language to help you express something when words are not enough, or just as if your medium is not paper, is not your screen, but it's a different material. And so that's how I was seeing this. So seeing the wood as my canvas, was a black canvas, and then I could create something, and it wasn't to represent something else that I had in mind, it was just to work through the thoughts and the concepts that I was exploring in the literature. So again, it's not a representation, I call it a presentation. And so it was a form of diagrammatic thinking. And it was really a way to then, I used them later on to facilitate those conversations around these kind of tricky issues around waste. So the way of thinking through my positions on waste, trying to understand my own thoughts, kind of deciphering them, unpacking them, and mapping them onto a diagrammatic piece. My current practice. So a few months ago, I studied Aikido, which is a Japanese martial art.
You started it a few months ago.
Yeah.
This is a new thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And Aikido means basically a way of adapting spirit to life force, and so it's a martial art that is not about attacking. It's about neutralizing the attack, and it's about protecting yourself and protecting the other. And I just couldn't help but think about the kind of overlaps or parallels between the way I conceive design and this martial art. And so design kind of cannot be reduced to disciplinary boundaries. And so in this case we have communication and industrial and spatial and so on.
We're not in this unit.
Not in this unit,
no.
which is a great thing, because design is none and all of these things. Design is mainly about collaborations, and so about cooperation, but also about awareness and consideration of the other. And the other in this case is the land, the environment, the people, the animals, anything, the human and non-human around us. And so to practice responsibly, we need to consider our effects, or like our actions affect other things. And so I think Aikido is a really good kind of metaphor for it, because it's a philosophy, it's not a technique. And so in design we don't just learn the kind of hard skills and so the techniques to achieve an end goal, but in my view of design, it should really be about the kind of mindset that gets generated and produced to kind of tackle things like real world challenges.
So you've already kind of covered this in what you were just talking about, but I suppose the students might be curious about, given in this unit we're talking about the changing nature of the profession, or as a discipline, design is broadening, it's becoming less of a sort of siloed off kind of practice where the conventions of those individual practices are kind of defining what designers do. There are other things which are coming into design and design's relationship. And it's a complex conversation. It's difficult. It's a lot to get your head around. Maybe in a kind of concrete way, and perhaps what you've done here in your PhD as well, what would you say for the students would be perhaps what you think are some emerging graduate attributes? But what would those attributes, do you think, what could those attributes be? That's too difficult a question. It's a big one.
I'll try my best to answer. It's a big question, and definitely something that I've put some thought in.
I would have thought so.
And especially being both of us design educators, we do think about what the future of designers and design practices, and we're looking at the emergence of different kinds of technologies and different kinds of collaborations, and in this case with the technology, like AI. And so I think rather than considering that as, or like rather than pretending that is not happening, especially not happening at the pace it is, I think it's important to account for it responsibly. And so I think the designer's attributes are going to be quite different to what we've seen in the past, I guess, at least 2 decades. Industry is changing. Designers are not just working in the industry, are working in all sorts of roles. And I'm thinking, like, you know, they're policymakers, they're working for government and non-government organizations, they're working profit and non-for-profit. So really what constitutes being a designer, again, is the mindset, and not to kind of go back to the Aikido practice, but it is really about practice. So it's a process. It's not really about specifically, it's about skills that go beyond the techniques or the tactics. And so I think ways for designers to be better equipped to deal with these really important shifts and like changes, you know, in the world, I think, are to kind of contemplate and reflexivity. And so my PhD was pretty much a series of contemplations. And I think this is a really important skill for designers to develop. And that's something that cannot be rushed, something that cannot be taught, can be facilitated, but no one can really, you know, teach you how to hone those skills. But so I think going forward, the way we teach design needs to change. The skills that we teach need to change as well. So we need to focus on the more human, I guess, skills, because eventually so many of, you know, the things that we do are going to be replaced in a much faster way and potentially high quality. And so I think it's important to focus on the things that, you know, make us so unique and cannot be replicated. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
It's almost impossible to answer it. But it definitely gives a good response to the question. I guess the fact that there isn't an answer to that question kind of does answer the question, because it's like what we're talking about with practice. It is emerging. I mean, if we could answer it, it isn't something that has emerged. It's an ongoing thing. And I guess again, this is the reason why we're studying this in this unit, because I think there are skills that can be developed that helps a design student and graduate, and even for us in education grappling with these big questions, kind of hold the complexity and the sort of uncertainty and ambiguity and, you know, all the emergent qualities that this presents, without trying to work it out or come up with some sort of concrete answer. This is what we have to do. And I guess it's Donna Haraway that said, staying with the trouble. Just sort of staying with it while that's happening, and I kind of feel like I do that with the students and learn a lot from how students respond to it as well, as I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Not everything is ambiguous. There's still some very concrete things that we teach that won't change, I don't think, but some of the big, kind of broader, almost existential things about design are changing. And I think we're working that out as it unfolds, and that can be really, really interesting as well as being, you know, a bit daunting. And
I don't know, I think if this PhD shows anything, it's like how you can stay with the trouble. And obviously I was also inspired by Donna Haraway. If you know, you can stay with the trouble and so contemplate the issue, like that ambiguity and that space of complexity, but you can do that in so many different ways, and you can do that creatively. And
I love that.
My way was to, you know, use a metaphor and to imagine to be something else and see where that led me. And so I still like follow the creative process, just kind of adapted it to my own way of thinking and being in the world. But, you know, being in contemplation or trying to navigate complexity doesn't mean that you have to, you know, sit down and stare at something and think until like your brain explodes. Like you can do that creatively through design mediums and ways.
I love that about your PhD. That was really beautifully presented. Thank you.
Thank you.